Happy Friday and welcome to Career Launch Live. I am your host, Catherine McCord, and I have with me the one, the only, Christopher Lynn. Welcome!
Hey, happy Friday. I was just as I was watching the intro again, I was like, man, I always love that intro. It's so
Kind of
good. But yeah,
dancey, right?
it is a great Friday. A little gloomy here in the San Francisco Bay Area, but it's all right. It's a
Well,
Friday.
here in Florida, it's beautiful, just so that you know. It's
Always.
sunshiny
It
and
always
gorgeous.
is.
Not always. Oh no, I have done this show when it was black outside. It's just terrible. But yeah, it's a good Friday. It's a great Friday. Today's topic is a little rough. It's a little exciting because it's going to mean some innovation. So in another way, it's I'm super stoked about it. But and I want to be really clear. So we're going to have to talk just a little bit about politics today, but we're going to keep that to a minimal because we want to discuss the solutions. So when you're commenting or if you have questions, let's focus on questions about how to be productive with this. You can let out your feelings too, but questions are not. We're not gonna answer questions about our political views today. We're gonna answer questions about the topic, which is how to build inclusion and how to support diversity when the laws are not on your side. And so,
Yeah.
Chris, tell us a little bit about why we're having to have this discussion.
Yeah. So we're starting to see more and more, especially here in the United States, right? So I think both of us being in the US, we need
Yes.
to, I guess, add that caveat as this is
Right.
a
Yeah.
very
We're in the US.
this is a US centric conversation. I do know, and I think we are aware that these things are happening around the world.
Yes.
However, here in the United States, we do need to. There are laws that are being enacted in different states that are either outright banning diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, or
Yes.
they are further marginalizing specific groups and
Yes.
communities that we need to address.
Right. 100%. And I want to say too, I I think a lot of people don't know that that the that there's laws actually being passed against inclusion efforts. That there are actual, like for instance, here in the state of Florida, they recently signed into law and I think it goes effect July 1st, where state any state funded organizations, that's governments, that's schools, et cetera, or anybody who just gets any kind of state funding towards them at all, um, they cannot have diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. They cannot support diversity. They cannot talk about inclusion. We're done. Um, they can't even educate on certain topics, which in a school is just anyway. That's a whole other discussion.
Yeah, I mean it's just so disheartening and frustrating, right? There's so many issues around that. So again, the conversation that you and I wanted to have was, well, how do we still move these efforts forward? Uh if how do we still move these things forward we are when they're being banned, right? When they're outright being outlawed. And it's so important for us to look at how we can make that happen. And I don't know. Oh, there you are.
There, I came back.
I was like,
I
what
had a
happened?
technical difficulty. I'm sorry. I'm not good
It's
at
okay.
working tech, so it
You're
just is
good.
what
You're
it
good. So
is.
yeah, so I was just saying, right? Like we have other, we have to find ways to make these things still happen, right?
Yes.
And so
Yes.
it's really important for us to look at, well, what are the skills that, from my standpoint, right? Look, being in talent and development and in DEI, how do we move these programs forward? Um, Even if we can't say that they're diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts,
I know, which is
right?
tricky. Like,
It's
oof,
really tricky.
it
How,
is. Oh,
however, there are definitely ways around it, right? There are
yes.
definitely, and I won't say around it. There are definitely ways of addressing these things without outright calling them DEI. right?
Right.
For example, we have I'm the organization that I consult with, Indelible Impressions. We are actually working with a community school district right now that is predominantly white, and they don't want to talk about DEI. So we and their DEI council, their equity council, has to kind of tiptoe around that fact. So in this case, we look at, well, we address it in this case, we address it in a different way. We
Right.
look at the community members, we look at the different parents and vendors and
Mhm.
everyone who's involved in the school district and say, what can we do to better support kids
Right.
in the school district?
Right.
What do we need to be able to do? Like, what are the resources that are not available to you that we're not
Right.
thinking of, right?
Right.
So we're addressing equity without saying the word equity, right?
Right.
We're still asking the same questions. It's just we're not
Right.
slapping the label on it because, as we know, the moment a label gets slapped onto anything in this country, it's
It's
like
so polarized
it can be very polarizing. So we can still do
instantaneously.
the work without calling it that work, right?
Right. And
Giving
I
it
I
the
want
name.
to I want to hit on something because you nailed it. So inclusion, people always think, oh, that's such a weird word. I'm like, no, 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 no. This is just a series of things that should be happening anyway, and we're just fixing it. So, for instance, I specialize with neurodiversity, right? And so I tell people all the time, I said, this is just learning to help your employees be healthier, happier, and more productive. That's it. That's all this is. It's extremely simple, basic concepts. And in my case, it's helping people work in a way that's natural for their brain and where they can, function better and more efficiently and more effectively, which is also healthier for them and makes them happier. Um, and so there's it's all very practical, really, which is funny to me. People act like this is an optional thing. Like, you are really missing the boat on this because this
Yeah.
is this is practicality.
Yeah. And
It
something I think that we often forget is we get so in our own heads and into our own worlds, right? We're so all of us become very tunnel visioned into our own experience that we forget
Yes.
about the experiences of others.
Yeah.
And so one of the tactics I use in organizations is to help them understand the marginalizations that they themselves have gone through, how
Hmm.
they have either felt excluded or felt like
Hmm.
inequity has occurred, and said,
Right.
okay, you have felt this, you've gone through this personally. We all have, regardless
Everybody.
of, right?
Everybody.
Even if you're part of the dominant culture in the organization you're
Still.
in, you have
Yeah.
still had something inequitable happen to you at that organization, or you've still been
In life.
excluded in that organ. There's something. There's
Yeah.
always something. So,
Yeah.
how do we help them tap into that understanding and then say, okay, so even though you're part of the dominant culture, we can still make this a better environment even for you.
Yes.
So how do
Yes.
we design a better environment for not just you, but you're one
Everybody.
of 500 people, 1,000 people, 10,000
Right.
people? How do we make that feeling how do we minimize that inequitable feeling, that lack of belonging, that lack of inclusion? How do we make
Right.
it better for everyone? And
Yeah.
then by them saying, "Okay, so it's not just me, but how do we do it for everyone?" Then that's how we
Yes.
start moving inclusion forward.
Oh, that is great. I love that. And to make it personal works. I've seen it
Yeah.
when I do my talks and things like that. I help people connect to it just as you were describing. I haven't done it. I haven't needed to do it so much with very many of my clients. Most of them kind of get it. The people that are attracted to work with me are already
Yeah.
kind of on board with the idea. Um, but it is really interesting. And I've had to explain this to people before I was a consultant. So I kind of get that, but it's very important to let people feel connected to the work and to help them to see that this is, again, practical and all that. So let's talk about, so to me, it's very simple, and then we'll kind of go into the specifics of how to do this. But number one is that if you want to create a better, healthier environment, no matter what you want to call it, a more productive environment, then you need to be flexible, right? You need to break your ego defense and respond with curiosity.
Mhm.
All right. We're going to talk about that in just a sec. And then you need to, you need to stop being a cheap ass because I learned, do you know, and Accenture did a study on this just not long ago that it's over 80% of accommodations cost $5 or less. So like
Yeah,
eh,
it's not hard. It really isn't
it's
hard.
not.
We build it up in our heads, right? And I think there's
Mhm.
some stigmas there, right? When we
There
talk about
are.
accommodations,
Yes.
especially.
Yes.
Um, right, because when we think of accommodations, I think we often think of physically abled or disabled individuals and the
Yes.
lengths that those individuals need to go through to be able to uh, be accommodated, right?
Right.
Because sometimes they're, I'll use my own housing community, for example. We don't have ramps at every sidewalk,
No.
which is stupid and actually out of
Very dumb.
compliance. But
Hmm.
if you talk about fixing that, that is a very large cost. So I think when we think about accommodations, we think about the big costs, not the small little one.
Right.
But it
Which
can be
it does
very simple.
happen.
Yeah.
Yes. And a lot of times it is extremely simple, especially these days.
Exactly.
Because there's been effort put towards that by people who know better, right? And knew
Yeah.
that these things were needed. So,
Yeah.
and it can be anything. It can be accommodations. Also, people think disability, to your point, right? But it can be something like somebody, that has glasses needing to have something so there's not a reflection on their computer screen, right?
Exactly.
It
Yeah.
just very basic things. And it's really funny to me because it became a bad word a while back in HR, this accommodation thing, but it's really not.
Yeah.
And even when it comes to race and things like that, it's really just a matter of, again, don't be a jerk, flexibility, and talking to people. So this is what baffles me. Like, why are you creating policies and procedures and all the concepts without talking to the people that they affect? I've never understood that. That makes no sense to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that
Talk to the
from
people.
yeah, from a government standpoint, right? From a government and community standpoint, they talk to people and
Do they
they do
though?
talk they do talk to people, but they talk to people that align with their own views. So it's not
Right.
like so right there are people, for example, there are people of certain races that will talk about, against some of the things that their own communities need, right?
That's true.
And
It
so
happens.
it's so they will find those people and say, "Hey, we did talk to people that are in this community, and this is what they said." So they can kind of check that box off. Um,
But one person doesn't represent a community. Like
exactly,
like you
exactly,
you do not represent all men, right? And I do not represent all women. That
exactly.
is not a
And
thing.
however, again, the bureaucracy doesn't allow for that. It doesn't allow
Right.
for the that kind of checks and balances to say, "Did you really talk to everyone?"
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And the same
because if
thing
you
at
did,
companies. It's the
yeah,
same thing. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, it's really important. So for from that standpoint, um, as ordinary citizens, we need to hold our elected officials much more accountable
Yes,
for the things that they're doing.
100%. Oh, first of all, and remember that they work for us, not the other way around,
Yeah,
please. I don't care who
yeah,
you are. You're the president of the United States or the Queen of England or King or whatever they have now. It's King now. I'm used to saying Queen. I've got to
yeah,
adjust that now.
yeah.
Whatever it is, they work for you,
Mhm.
not the other way around.
Yeah.
And really and truly, it it's kind of that way with leadership in companies, right? Like when you're in leadership, it's a position of servitude. If no one ever told you this, welcome to the world of
Yeah.
knowledge. That's your
Well, again,
job.
we still hold the industrial complex, right? Where it's
Right.
leadership is a position of power, not serving, right? The
Yeah. Oh yeah.
where we know, you and I know right now is it that's completely flipped, right?
Yes.
It has to be a position of influence, yet
Hmm.
it has to be a position where you are serving the people that are moving the work ahead, that you're leading, right?
100%. And even to parenting. I mean, I was just having a conversation with my
Oh my
mother
gosh, yeah.
yesterday. Yeah, it's just, yeah, you know all about that. Um, I I just had a conversation with my mother yesterday, who was a brilliant parent. And I went through a lot as a kid that she could not personally relate to. She had no experience with this. She's like, what in the world do I do with this? She realized I had obsessive compulsive disorder when I was about 4 years old. Then I started having depression and mania and all this fun stuff. And I eventually received a diagnosis of bipolar. But she communicated with me to understand how to help. And she always treated me like a human, not like this little dog that she had running around her house.
Mhm.
I was always a person. I always had my own needs, my own opinions, all of this from the time I was itty bitty. It was never any different than that, which created a very interesting
Yeah.
personality. But that's a whole other thing to get into. But that communication allowed her to help me. And that made me stronger. It gave me better tools for my life. It made me healthier. And the same thing happens in the workplace. When you communicate with people and ask them what they need, then you can solve all these problems. I
Yeah.
that was the biggest lesson ever for me in leadership was I boofed it once. I did not ask somebody and I ended up looking stupid because if I had just asked, all the problems would have been solved.
Yeah. And going back to like how this is how we go around, right? Like these laws
Right.
and things. Like it just by asking our communities like
Mhm.
the things that they need, they
Yeah.
will tell you or tell us if you're leading a community,
Right.
like the things that you need. And again, getting around some of those laws that prevent equity and justice and inclusion from happening in our communities and in our society, for me it goes back to what are the foundational issues that we need to like attack,
Yes.
like, or address. Not, I
Yes.
shouldn't use that, to address, right? And some of those things are as basic as just like leadership skills or resourcing and or resource allocation. And
Yeah.
the things that are mandatory, you can say, hey, here are things that, skills.
Hmm.
Maybe we don't call it DEI skills, and we shouldn't have ever called it DEI skills to begin
Right.
with.
Just skills.
They're just foundational, critical skills that we need in order to interact with each
Yes.
other.
Yes.
And those things like coming in with compassion, coming in with empathy, coming in with the ability to influence others, coming
Yes.
in with the ability to manage change, those sort of things,
Yes.
these people elements are the foundation for us to be good leaders. And by leaders, I actually mean like, I don't just mean someone with a position of power or
No.
influence. This
Anybody.
Everyone needs these leadership skills. Everyone is a
Yes.
leader onto themselves as well as the immediate circles that they have around them.
Yes.
Even if you don't hold a position of power, and that's
That's true.
okay. And so then when we talk about, okay, well, here are the things that you need to become a more compassionate leader. Here are the things you need to become more
Yes.
skilled in managing change, those sort of things. For you to uh, then talk about like DEI and talk about
Hmm.
things like culture or like the history of our country here in the United States, you can say, okay, here are some things for you to be able to learn and dig in
Right.
deeper
Right.
if you want to learn more about this culture or this group or this community, because
Right.
most of the laws say you cannot teach these things.
Yes.
However,
So now,
they cannot tell you what you can do on your own time. So
right.
if you point people to these areas, more than likely they will become curious, as you said earlier, is like
Hmm.
once you develop that curiosity and say, oh, I didn't think about those issues or those problems from that group. Let me go
Right.
look at that.
Right.
Then you can start that journey of learning or unlearning that you
Yes.
need to do from a DEI perspective.
Yes. And it's very simple too, because so the ego defense that I mentioned earlier is a naturally occurring phenomenon in the human brain. So the human brain needs to be right. that is its inherent need, right?
Yeah.
And so there is a biological response that when it gets information that it's wrong, it starts throwing up defenses. No, I'm right. No, I'm right. No, I'm right. This is scary. This is scary. And there were reasons for that at one point. And even when we're children, there are reasons that that occurs. But as we get older, it's not very helpful. So we must learn to manage it. So when you feel that happening, and it happens to literally everybody, when you feel that response coming, when someone says something that's contrary, instead of responding with, I'm right because, respond with curiosity and say, tell me more about that, because you will be really surprised. And it's not necessarily about trying to have your mind changed, it's about learning the other side, getting more knowledge, more understanding. And what you will start to realize is even if your core belief about something stays the same, you will start to grow, and that opinion will grow and flourish in a more healthy and informed way, which
Yeah.
we all want. So to Pam, to answer your question, that's example number one of better communication. And Chris, what examples do you have? Can you give us an example real quick of a better way to communicate with people that breeds a sense of belonging? What
Yeah.
example do you have?
I think for belonging and inclusion, the questions to ask are, who's not in this room? Who needs to be part of this conversation? Who are we leaving out? And I have a very simple story where I realized this when I was in college. Is I was working at I was this place I was working at. Um, everyone was pretty close. I think everyone's has like their bad working story or bad job story. And
Yeah, I
the
think
thing that
so.
helped us get through it was like the community that we had as employees together. And something I didn't realize was as I was, I'm the host type of person, so I'll always ask people like, "Hey, you want to come over? Or you want to go do something?" Um, I didn't realize I was leaving someone out, and someone was like, "Hey, why do you never ask me to go to these things?" And so that was a very like, "Oh, I didn't even realize I was leaving you out. I'm so sorry.
Right.
Let's include you." So in that moment, like sometimes we just overlook that. So again, in our
Yes.
communities, in our places of work, on our teams, who are we leaving out or who should be part of this conversation? And then again, it goes back to your core thesis that here is like just
Yes.
asking questions and being curious. That will help you or help us become more inclusive.
Right.
Um, in just saying, okay, like how do we create this environment where we actually get all the perspectives that we
Right.
need to be able to move things forward?
Yes. I think, and that was a great story for this because I like that I like that they felt psychologically safe enough to give you that feedback, right? Like,
Yeah,
hey,
yeah,
hi, you're leaving me out, right?
yeah,
And psychological safety, for anyone that doesn't know, it's just a matter of your people feeling comfortable to raise issues, to dissent, things like that. That's all that means. Very simple concept. Um, and then I love that you responded with, oh, okay. So it's not an attack on you when someone says to you, hey, I have this need, or ask the question why, or anything like that. That's not an attack. This is someone engaging you and trying to connect
yeah,
in some way, shape, or form. So remember again to kind of block that ego and block your pride a little bit, because that can also be a prideful response, not so much the ego defense, and just say, okay, whoops, let's talk about this, or
yeah,
here's why, and let's have a discussion.
yeah,
Because sometimes you may have a very good reason,
yeah,
right? And you may need to share that, and that's okay. But why is not a bad thing? And that's another part of inclusion is creating that psychological safety. Um, so my next question for you, because this is one that gets me. So I get asked a lot because a lot of problems come from initial policies and procedures. So I've seen, for instance, and this delves into religion, race, all of this. I have seen policies that are inherently discriminatory, such as hair policies, dress policies, even tattoo policies. And a lot of people are unaware that tattooing can actually be cultural. It can actually have to do with your religion. And so you can't make a policy against that so that you know. So we need to start working on this type of inclusion. Now, one of my main factors is don't build a policy around it if it doesn't actually matter. So if somebody's tattooed, that does not affect their ability to do their job. Doesn't matter. Now, maybe if they're client facing, that could be a little bit of an issue. But other than that, and even then, train your clients. So if it doesn't affect their ability to do their job, that's it. And the same thing with religion inclusion. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But what are your thoughts about how to go into policy making to make sure that everything is
Yeah.
covered and that your people are considered and taken care of?
Yeah. It's really tricky, right? Because when you think about policy, it it it's tricky from the standpoint that it's very easy to exclude something or someone unintentionally. And again, that's what we call unconscious bias, right?
Yeah,
And it's more um and it's especially difficult when you don't know all of the different religious practices,
right.
cultural practices. So this is why it's important to just, I think we, especially here in the United States, we have this hustle culture and like get things
Yeah,
done and just get it out,
yeah,
to like test it and make sure it's okay as well. Like I don't know
yeah.
why organizations don't do more pilots. And
Right.
especially when it comes to policies, it's like,
Right.
hey, especially when it comes to policies, to say, hey, this is something that we're considering. We really need to have more of a voice on this
Yes.
because it's going to affect our entire employee population. Like,
Yes.
it's okay to ask those questions and to say,
Yeah.
hey, we're thinking about doing this. Will this work?
Right. And
Um,
have think tanks around it. Have your people come together and like and again, get
yeah,
them in there and
yeah,
have think tanks.
yeah,
And for those who want to participate, not everybody will, and that's
yeah,
okay. But for anybody who wants to have think tanks, let people participate, let people give feedback. Anonymous can be good because sometimes they're afraid to raise their hand or they're nervous or
yeah,
something like that. So
exactly.
anonymous feedback is also good too, to let them just go, hey, this is really stupid. Please don't do that. Or this makes me feel bad. Please don't do this. Or this one inhibit my job. And sometimes you don't realize like you're making a policy that will actually make it more difficult for someone to do their job.
Yeah. And again, from the talent development standpoint, this is why it's so important to look at, okay, well, what are the actual things that need to be done in this role, and
Yes.
say, okay, these are the skills, these are the actual requirements for
Yes.
this role, right? And these are the things that, some of the things that I do is like, these are the hard requirements that are absolutely needed in this job or in this
Yes.
department or something. And then here are the things that are like not so critical. They're supplemental. They help, but they don't. They're that just that they enhance the role or they enhance the person's
Right.
ability to do the role or something like that. So then you look at those hard set of skills and say, okay, these are the things that we absolutely need to have for this person
Right.
for them to be able to do their job. And
I
then
love
you
it.
look at those instead of looking at like 10, 20 skills. Now all of a sudden you're looking at maybe like 5
Yeah.
or 6. And then you can say like, okay, well, like when we create policies around it, like it's much more
Right.
manageable to look at
Right.
that way.
Oh, that's a good tip. I like that. So last question, because this is one of the things that I teach the most around inclusion and all that is that there's inclusion and then there's infliction, right? So inclusion is just as an example. If you have a Muslim employee and a Christian employee, they are both entitled to pray on their own in a way that does not disturb the workplace, but they cannot insist that other people participate
Mhm.
or do it in a way that disturbs the workplace. That's the difference. So inclusion is you get to do this thing over here. Infliction is everyone's got to do it, and or to make it such an ordeal that people cannot avoid it if they so choose. For instance,
Right.
no praying in meetings, folks. Unless you are a Christian based or faith based, excuse me, any faith based organization, no, just do not. Um, so, how do you draw that line very clearly as leadership and training, so on and so forth, how do you draw that line between we are welcoming, we are making sure that everyone feels a part, but and we're building all of this for you, we're considering you in our design, but we're not going to inflict on you. How do you do that?
Again, there's going to be some testing out here that needs to happen,
Mhm.
to say, hey, we would like to do X. Is this okay? Right.
Yeah.
The other thing that we need to acknowledge as leaders and in DEI, and even, either in the workplace or in society from a governance standpoint, is we are going to make mistakes and we need to let it be okay that we make mistakes. We
Yes.
are going
Yes.
to accidentally exclude or accidentally marginalize people,
Yeah.
and we need to say, rather than, oh, either deal with it or, oh my gosh, it's an attack on like what I did, it's, as you said before, okay, let's quickly adjust, let's allow
Yes.
ourselves to pivot.
Just
and
pivot. It's no
so
big deal.
and so that, from my standpoint, when you talk about inclusion and infliction, you can definitely move your processes and culture forward in
Mhm.
your organizations or in your communities. You just need to be aware that, hey, if these things happen, if someone raises a flag and say, not okay, I'm not okay with this, and
Right.
it, again, it doesn't have it, it doesn't affect how the organization works, or does
Yes.
business, then just pivot,
To
just
just
pivot,
do it.
and it's
Just
okay.
do
Yeah,
it. Just make it and stop making everything have bureaucracy at companies. It's
yeah,
stupid. If somebody is in a position where they manage DE&I or they manage HR, whatever it is, then they need to have the autonomy to change things like this.
yeah,
Just boop, change it, done. And then just let everybody else know what's up. That is their
yeah.
job. You have put them in that position. That's the end of it. So, all right. So basically, so I'm going to sum it up. So, so all of this is about practicality, right? And about keeping your employees healthier, happier, more effective, more efficient in their jobs. This is all practicality. There doesn't need to be a label on it. This is also about integrity in your business. So that's a good I word that you can use. That's not illegal yet, and better never be. Integrity, and then make sure that you have education as people come into your organization. Find out how they learn, how they communicate, things like that. Include people in decision making. Nobody has said that that's illegal. Include people before you make decisions. Trial runs. I loved that. I love the idea of, hey, let's just see how this policy goes. Let's see how we go. And let's get some good feedback on it. I recommend, again, anonymous feedback as well as in person feedback, think tanks, things like that. And what am I forgetting, Chris? What am I forgetting?
And being curious, and
Oh, yeah.
not letting your ego and pride get in the way,
Yes.
right?
Remember, it's
Again,
not an attack if somebody asks why.
yeah.
Calm down. Even if they tell you that you're doing something uninclusive, it's not an attack. Calm down. They're just expressing a need. Um, so I think maybe our message for today is be practical and be chill. Like that. A
Chill,
little,
chill the
and
F
curious.
out.
And chill the F out, everyone. Just whew, breathe.
It's all
Um,
right. It's gonna be okay.
breathe. And outside that, so what is your final word of wisdom for everybody as we say goodbye? And then tell everybody how to find you because you're
Yeah.
awesome and everyone should connect and follow you.
Well, again, thank you for having me. It's always
Absolutely.
a great conversation whenever you and I can get together.
Yeah.
Final word. I mean, just this is something I preach, right? Is just lead people first and think about how you can. Leading people first is about understanding the people that you're actually leading and then doing
Yeah.
what you need to create the environments for them to succeed. And so
Oh,
if you can keep doing that, right, that applies to so many walks of life, then you'll all of us will be better for it. And yeah,
oh,
if you want to follow me,
100%.
find me. The Leading People First podcast is has been rebooted, so you can find us anywhere you find your podcast and on YouTube. And you can follow me on LinkedIn at Lead with Chris.
Oh, I love that. Everybody connect to Chris. I highly recommend it. Connect to me, reach out to either of us if you have questions about anything here that we've talked about. And then for me, I am actually going to be in London next week. So while the show will
Nice.
be on, it was actually going to be pre-recorded because I was worried about connectivity and things like that and my schedule. But thank you all so very much for joining. Same time, same place next week. Be great, everybody.